Okay, so this video for AGB 312 is really to continue with the review of introductory microeconomics. So what we're going to do on this video is look at the profit maximizing behavior of the individual firm, and kind of critical to that is show how it connects to the broader supply and demand curves of the market. Okay, so again, we start out with our demand and supply curves. We've already talked about how equilibrium occurs where supply, the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded. So remember, technically speaking, we're saying the price is called out for the demand. So price, consumers hear the demand, they determine the quantity. Same thing with the suppliers, price called out, the suppliers then determine the quantity supplied in aggregate. And when we have this equilibrium, we have the quantity supplied equals the quantity demand. Again, we've spoken about that before. But this is talking about the aggregate market, all the firms, all the consumers. And so the next step is to start looking, what is the situation for the individual firm? So an individual firm has its own cost curves. We have the marginal cost, which is equivalent to the individual firm's supply curve. We'll talk about that a little bit later. We also have the average total cost, which is simply total cost divided by quantity. And we have the average variable cost, which is the total variable cost divided by quantity. Okay? So the key thing to remember for these individual firms, they're all coming out of, and I should also recall that the marginal cost is the change in the total cost divided by the change in the quantity. So the key thing to remember is all these curves are coming out of this total cost idea. So if anything that changes the total cost changes, then we'll see a change in all these curves. So essentially these curves will move together. What's underlying all this is technology, prices of the factors of production, a lot of those supply shifter categories that we've talked about already. Okay, so again, we want to remember that this is the cost curves for an individual firm, and it's affected by price, which is coming out of the overall market supply and demand. So we've got this equilibrium price, this market price. So what we want to do is say, okay, the price is simply transferred over to the individual firm. The individual firm hears the price. What price do they hear? They hear the market price. So this is the price that the firm hears. And what that price is for the individual firm, which has no influence over the market price, that price is the marginal revenue. Marginal revenue is simply if you increase your sales by 1 unit, how much money do you get back? Well, anytime an individual firm produces 1 more unit and it sells it, it simply gets the market price. So this marginal revenue curve, actually this marginal revenue is simply a line, a horizontal line, because regardless of how much the individual firm produces, it will always get the market price. It can't get a higher price on its own. Okay? So, now we have the price. The firm hears the price. Now the firm has to decide how much to produce. So we assume that the firm is a profit maximizer. So we have to recall that our profit maximizing rule is marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So that's our rule for saying if the firm uses marginal revenue equals marginal cost to determine their quantity, they'll come up with a quantity that maximizes their profit. Any deviation from this quantity determined by marginal revenue equals marginal cost will lower their profit. Okay? So let's look at the process. So the firm hears the price. So the firm hears the price, and then the firm says, okay, how much do I produce? He or she says, I'll produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So we have our marginal revenue curve, we have our marginal cost curve, we have our marginal revenue line, and then we just drop a line from that intersection, and by definition, we have the profit maximizing level of output. This is what the firm should produce to maximize their profit. So let's calculate what the profit would be, kind of in a graphical way. So profit is simply equal to total revenue minus total cost. Okay? So total revenue is simply the price of the good times the quantity. So what we're going to do is say, at this quantity, what's the total revenue of the firm? Well, price times quantity. So if we look at the area of this box, height times width, the area of this box is your total revenue. This is how much the firm receives for selling Q star amount of goods. Okay, so we've got that first element of the profit. We've got the total profit. We've got the total revenue. So now we have to calculate the total cost. Now, how do we do that? All we have are average variable cost, average total cost, marginal cost. We don't have the total cost measured directly. But with using a definition and very simple algebra, we can determine the total cost. So we're going to look at this average total cost. By definition, average total cost is total cost divided by quantity. So this is like a defined relationship. Well, if this equality holds, we can do some cross multiplication and we can say, well, total cost is simply quantity times average total cost. So if you give me the quantity and you give me the average total cost at that quantity, I multiply those two together and I've calculated the total cost. So at our Q star, what is our average total cost? Well, starting from that quantity, we'll go up, and where we hit that average total cost curve, we'll go across. And that's our average total cost at that Q star quantity, right? And how will we show the total cost? Well, it's going to be that quantity times that average total cost. And so the area of this box, height times width, the area of this box is our total cost. Now we've got our second element. So if we've got the total revenue, this box, we've got the total cost box, well, we can calculate what the profit is. So the area of the total revenue, that box, subtract your total cost, subtract that box, and what you have left is the area of this box, which represents your profit. Okay? So, by definition, if Q star is our profit maximizing level of output, then the area of this box represents the maximum possible profit that a firm can earn given its technology, given its cost curves, and given the market price that it receives. Okay? So, what would happen if there's a change in price? So let's say that there's a shift in supply. Let's say that there's, well actually let's say there's a shift in demand. So we go back to this market supply and demand curve, and we say that there's been a demographic change in the market. So remember, demographics are one of the shifters of demand. We'll say that there's been a large amount of migration out of the market. So let's say we're talking about a local market for avocados, and suddenly it's summer and all the students have left. So we have fewer consumers in the market. We have a shift to the left of, we'll do blue. We'll have a shift to the left in the demand curve because at any given price, we expect demand to be lower because there are just fewer people in the market to buy the good. And so what happens? there's a new equilibrium price and quantity. Okay? So what we're going to do then, let me get another marker here. So if we have a shift, and again, there's been no change in the supply, so no change in the technology, no change in seller expectations, no change in any of those other shifters, simply a demand shift. And covering these things up. And we'll start saying, okay, we've got a new market price. And a new marginal revenue line. And I know this is a little messy, but so we'll just kind of erase this. So we'll erase our old price. We've got to keep our cost curves. The cost curves are the same as they always were before. I redo the price. So we had the price, okay? So we have to follow our recipe again. The rule says where marginal revenue and marginal cost intersect, where they're equal, marginal revenue equals marginal cost gives us our new profit maximizing level of output for the firm. So we see in this kind of crude graph that quantity with the decrease in price, there's a decrease in the profit maximizing level of output, okay? But again, we can still use the same recipe. So we've got the quantity, now we're going to calculate our profit. What's our total revenue? Well again, since the price is the same thing as marginal revenue, we're just saying price, let me erase the old graph here, old line here. So we have price times quantity. So this box here represents our total revenue. What about our total cost? Well, starting at our new profit maximizing level of output, we go up until we hit that average total cost curve. Because remember, quantity times average total cost equals our total cost. So for this quantity, what's the average total cost? Well, it's at this level, so at our new average total cost. And so that average total cost times the quantity, this box represents our total cost. So if we say total revenue, that area of that box, subtract total cost, subtract that box, and the remaining box is our profit. So again, by definition, this must be the maximum possible profit, the maximum profit a firm can make given this price, given this market price, and given the technology and all the underlying factors which determine the cost curves. Okay, so we've just gone through the determination of the market price, its impact on the firm, what the firm does to maximize its profits. We've kind of briefly talked about how any change in any of the shifters will change the market price and subsequently change the profit maximizing level of output. So in our first two examples for those two prices, we had positive profits both times. So what we want to keep in mind is that there are these secondary effects. Because one of the assumptions is that when we're at this market equilibrium, and equilibrium in the entire economy, the basic idea is that all firms are essentially making the same profit. So there's no motivation to change, to move from producing one good to another. So when we start talking about these secondary effects, so we want to start with the initial effects, see what happens, and then start saying, well, what are the implications of what's happened? So theoretically speaking, if this firm, and let's say it's a representative firm in the market, in the industry, so if this firm is making positive profits, other firms are going to start saying, well, I'm making essentially zero economic profit. I'm making the same level of profit that everyone else is, but except for the firms in this industry. So what's going to happen is that firms will start saying, I'm going to shift to whatever product this firm is making. Because they'll, if they adopt the same technologies and they're going to see the same market price, they're going to get the same positive profit. Seems great, right? But the problem is, as more and more firms come in, that's going to be increasing the number of sellers. That's going to shift the supply curve to the right. And what's going to happen? Well, you're going to start seeing prices come down, and you will see quantities go up, which makes sense. So what happens when the price comes down? Well, you're going to see, and you want to practice this on your own, no change in the cost curves yet, but you're going to see this price come down as a result of the more and more suppliers coming in. The price is going to come down. That profit is going to narrow. As long as that profit is still positive, as long as there's a box above here, more firms are going to come in. It could slow down, but when does it stop? Well, it stops when the price is zero. When the price is zero, everyone's back making the same level of profit as everyone else, and there's no more movement. Another thing to keep in mind is if there's a technology change. And this is kind of more of a thought experiment. But you have these cost curves, they're based on the technology. And so if you have a technology that makes the firm more productive, able to do more with the same amount of resources, you're going to see these cost curves shift down as a group. So if you have a certain price and the cost curve shift down, you're going to see profits increase. You're going to see the quantity supplied increase. So again, you want to start practicing with your micro theory fundamentals to see what's happening, because this is very important to understand policy, and we'll go through more examples in class.